Kia ora, everybody. I'm sitting here with Matt Gibson from Overseas Expeditions. Is that right?
Overseas experiences, mate. Ultimate OE.
Ultimate OE. It's something that, as a university student, I was like, hell yeah, let's do that. But then life happens, and I'm still yet to do that. And now with the young child, I don't know if that'll be something that'll be on the list anymore.
Yeah, we tend to have a little bit of a window.
And ironically, your podcast, The Educated Hunter, comes out of New Zealand, and me, the Stag, having been based in Australia the last year, has come out of Australia. Yet I'm in New Zealand right now, and you're over the other side of the world in Vancouver. Before we get into how all that comes about, I always start my podcast with, what did you do in the weekend, Matt? And then, being a crossover podcast, we'll go ahead with your lead-in question. So what did you do in the weekend, mate?
Last weekend, it's a good question, actually. I bet you get some interesting answers. Last weekend, I was at an Irishman's 30th in Big White, which is the ski field about an hour out of Kelowna, BC. So we had there would have been 10 of us. Me and my partner, Anna, were the only two Kiwis. The rest were all Irish. There might have been a token Canadian, as it sometimes happens in that situation, but most of them are raging Irishmen. Up on the ski in, ski out chalet in Big White. So, yeah, spent the weekend skiing and, every day's a leg day, I guess.
Lovely. And was your amazing guest, Alan Kenny, was he there, or was that his stag do?
Yeah, it was actually. It was not his stag do, it was his 30th. So,
that's right, 30th. Yeah,
so Alan, you're probably referring to the podcast I did with him a few months back.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Alan is new to hunting. He's what I've started to call the hipster hunter crowd. So guys that are have got no background, and girls for that matter, no background in hunting, that have sort of, to be fair, this podcast medium has probably got a little bit of accountability in terms of spreading the word and getting people to sort of understand a little bit more of the broader ideas and sort of the mentality behind sort of ethical and legal hunting. And he's one of these guys that once he figured out that I was a hunter, he came to me and said, look, man, I really want to see what it's all about. And to his credit, he went away and did all the necessary paperwork and got the necessary licenses. So, yeah, took him away on his first hunt this past season. And this year he's raring to go, boy. He's got like 3 or 4 hunts booked in with me. I don't know if I'm going to have any time to hunt for myself.
Nice. And the slogan that's on your hat, this probably plays a big part in the responsibility for the hipster hunter movement, you know.
What had him on? I'm wearing the Cam Haynes hat. Yeah, I am. Yeah, no, he's another guy that, I've had a bit to do with in the past, and hopefully we'll, touch wood, have a bit to do with in the future. There's a few projects on the horizon that I might get to spend some more time with Cam. But yeah, Cam's another one of those guys that he's got some very strong core values and pretty strong ideas when it comes to hunting, and promotes a really positive version of hunting, and sort of through that whole Joe Rogan machine has become very, very popular. But to be fair, before that he was popular in his own right. He spent a lot of time sort of pushing his brand and his way of doing things before he even met Joe. It was just that little push that put him into the stratosphere, really.
Lovely. So over to you. What's your leading question?
To be honest with you, when you messaged me, how we connected was over Instagram, and you messaged me and I had no idea who you were. I saw the name of your podcast. It was called Stag, and I thought, oh yeah, he's obviously into, or at least mildly interested in hunting, so it might be an interesting yarn. But I mean, I guess the question is, why did you call it the Stag Raw podcast, and what is it about exactly?
Lovely. So I definitely fit into the hipster hunting realm.
Good.
Despite growing up in Invercargill, we're privy to some of the greatest, public land areas and private areas. I never went hunting. I never did the great walks, and I'm quite ashamed of that now. And it wasn't till, I guess, the end of high school, but too busy playing sport, that I sort of thought, hey, this deer industry and this hunting industry is hugely fascinating, and it started to create a little bit of a niche for me. And through uni and things like that, I just kept following it, would buy the odd hunting magazine on the plane, and then I don't know, I think Southland Stags as well sort of drove another little bit of passion around what are these deer like, and I've got this huge passion for deer farming as well. So it all comes together, and then we amazingly managed to tip Canterbury up in a 9-3 rugby game in Christchurch, and everybody from Southland all of a sudden became so-and-so Stag so-and-so on their Facebook, and I consequently moved to Auckland, and playing rugby, you know, people can never seem to say hard names like Ryan, and so nicknames fall into place, and I became Stag. And so, yeah, the podcast, you know, Stag Raw is a loud thing, you know, it's letting the people know that you're ready and get out of my territory. But the whole thing around the Stag Raw is to try, I guess, capture the same sort of people of the level that I'm at. They're sort of 25 to 35, 20 to 35, starting to sort of try and figure out who they are as a person. And then the sort of content behind the podcast is mostly about health. And what I sort of believe is that the closer you are to your food, the healthier you are. So I've had plenty of people that come from a real sort of lower carbohydrate, whole food background come in and talk. We're looking at talking to a guy in the UK who's, you know, a keen spear fisherman. He's a keen hunter, which is difficult in the UK. But then he's also a gymnast. We've had Keegan Smith on, who's you know trained the Sydney Roosters to championships. He's gone all around the world coaching people in strength and conditioning, but now himself has moved into a farm area. We had another guy who's, you know, loves travelling around in the outback, loves doing trad bow hunting, and he's found that the combination of those two, you know, real raw lifestyles and hunting and eating meat has meant that his thyroid disease has turned around. So I'd love, and that's why I resonated so well with you guys' podcast, I'd love for the story of hunting to not be this grip and grin carry on. And you know, I'm on the, not to call them out, but the Venison Hunters Facebook page, you know, I'd love for it not to be about people getting uproar and showing how many animals they knocked off, but really going deeper into, you know, this is the animal, this is what I'm doing with the animal. Hey, I might even get the pelt out. You know, I've got beautiful red skin rolled up in the ceiling for when we come back to New Zealand. But you know, there's so much more to hunting than just going out and shooting an animal to doing it for the gram is the common thing is. And that's what I love about the podcast from you guys is, hey, you guys are doing something really special in creating a real true narrative about hunting. And as I said, back to university, going on an OE as a outfitter just I thought was so cool. But as I said, life happens.
Well, we can talk about the OE stuff a bit later, but I mean, just touching on a few of the points you've made there, it's nice that that's what you're getting out of our podcast. It's what we are trying to do, and it's become pretty obvious to me over time that not one podcast or one voice is going to change some of the negative or misinterpreted narratives around hunting. It sort of falls on all of our shoulders as hunters, those that do it for the right reasons, with the right code of ethics, to all sort of stand up and say, this is how I do it and this is why I do it. And realizing that everybody's not the same. Like, we all have different motivations for why we get out on the hill. I think it's like you say, hunting, being on the hill, hunting and gathering your own food is a very healthy lifestyle. You can't do that correctly without being healthy to some extent if you're doing it often. So there's that side of things. I mean, to touch on like the whole grip and grin, doing it for the gram, Facebook stuff. I mean, humans are humans, right? We've all got egos, and I think one of the biggest challenges we have, particularly with hunters, is ego. And it comes down to a lot of the time of why you're posting photos. And it is a sense of achievement a lot of times. But at the same time, we have to admit that if you posted a photo on a public forum, I mean, you're going to be looking at the comments and you're going to be looking at the likes just because it feels good. We have to admit it feels good. And I'm just as guilty of doing it as the next person. But I think from a hunting perspective, because it is such a social hot potato at the moment, and people who don't hunt or don't have a background in hunting can so easily see those images and take it the wrong way. I mean, I've said it on our podcast and other podcasts I've done. It's very much like when you post a grip and grin photo of a dead animal sitting behind it with a big smile on your face. You know, as hunters, we get that. We understand why you're happy. Non-hunters don't get that. That's like showing somebody the last chapter of a book. You know, they don't have the context of you reading the 50 chapters beforehand and the journey you've been on to get to that point. It's like, you know, putting climbing Everest down to the last step you take onto the summit. We all know it's not just that last step, as good as that must feel. There's a lot of pre-work and a lot of steps that have gone on before that, which makes that last step such an achievement. And I think that's what's missing out of a lot of our hunting narrative a lot of the time, is the build up to that achievement, that build up to that moment. And that's why we've got a big shit-eating grin on our face, you know, when we're sitting behind something we're genuinely proud of. And there's nothing wrong with that. All it comes down to is understanding that if we just put that last page in front of people who haven't read the book ever or have never read before, for that, you know, for that matter, you know, reading being hunting, then we can't expect them to understand while we're sitting there and with a big grin on our face, and they're going to draw a natural conclusion, which is, you know, you're happy that that thing is dead, which is not necessarily the case.
No, and I'd recently had Kai Frenier on the podcast, who again is a trad bow hunter, and she recently went out and got her first series of goats, and it was the same thing. You know, she posted the goats, and she's going to a hunting expo in Australia, and people were saying, "Oh, she's been goat hunting for 2 weeks," but no, she's been trying to refine a bow for over a year, every day, hours and hours, so that she can then go out and, you know, somewhat relatively, in some people's opinion, easy species to hunt. But when you're in a dry and barren Australian outback where there's, you know, dogs and all sorts of predators around, hey, you know, those animals are equally going to be on edge. So, you know, like I say, it's not that, hey, look at Kai, she's got a goat, or that was easy. No, it's taken her a year's amount of work, and then, like she said, 20 years of survival experience being in, you know, all sorts of situations to be able to feel confident to go out and do that. And
that's a hard narrative to say in a picture. You can't explain that in a photo, right? So it is a real challenge, particularly when people are sharing photos purely just out of ego. Look what I did. And I think it's a combination of people that are just getting into hunting and they need some some reassurance that they're doing it right, or they want some social recognition that the delivery know the achievements they've had, or, you know, where they've got at this point, and that's fine. I get that. It's just coming back to being intelligent about where we share it and how we share it. So yeah, it's a different beast these days when it comes to social media and hunting and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, to dial it all the way back, I'm glad that you are getting benefit out of the Educated Hunter podcast, or at least enjoying the fact that we're trying to push that general narrative behind hunting and get people thinking about, you know, why we do what we do.
Yeah, and as I said in the emails, this is probably the case of the educated versus the uneducated. I was probably selling myself a little bit short there, because I've been trying for many years, and it's started off like a needle in a haystack, and ever so slowly those needles start to get bigger and brighter, and you know, you add torches and they start to reflect a bit better, and maybe a magnet or two. And so it's gone from trying not to get lost in the likes of the kaimais or Te Tapui, which is a tiny bush block, to actually stumbling across animals. And then, you know, it's such a humbling experience being out in the bush. Not only do you have to contend with climbing and bush and all that sort of stuff, but then to actually try to figure out where you are, where the animals are, and are you on the right track? It's you know, the failure rate is fast, but then the rewards and the sort of small things, I guess it's like golf. You can just do one shot and feel great. You know, you can find one animal and go, hey, I'm doing something right, or find one scrape pad and go, hey, I'm doing something right. This is where they should be. How was your sort of learning curve to hunting? Was it something that you were brought up with, or something that you had a good mentor through, or
Yep.
found your own?
I started pretty early. My father was an avid hunter. funnily enough, his father wasn't, so he came into it relatively late. But once he was into it, he really knuckled down, and I picked it up basically from the moment I could walk. I was I was eeling, building bow and arrows out of bits of super jack, causing havoc amongst the local robe, possum and rabbit population, probably a little bit before my time, really, and probably a little bit before I should have been in reality. So for me, hunting has always been there. It's meant different things at different times in my life. Sort of one thing that I talk about a lot with a bunch of my hunting mates and guys that I hunt with and have lots of contact with in the industry is everybody's sort of natural evolution as a hunter, from where we start and why we do things and how that changes over time. So my progression was, recreational, doing it with my father, then very much on the subsistence side when, I was at university and hungry. And then from there, it went into a completely different realm once I started doing it professionally. So once I discovered guiding, and guiding as a vehicle to sort of help people realize their dreams. I mean, dreams is pretty cliche and sounds a bit weird when you say it, but help people achieve their goals is probably a better description of it. And seeing people go through, mental and physical hardship in the short term, come through the other side of it and achieve or not achieve what they want to do. Being part of those sort of 10 to 14 day journeys for a large volume of people became a drug for me. It still is. It's part of the reason why I don't think I can ever quit guiding. I love the feeling of facilitating that experience for people. So throughout the professional side of things, it sort of changed my perspective in the fact that it's not all about, or became less about pulling the trigger for me and more about the journey that hunting can be. So I find myself, as I get older, I keep pushing the goalposts further back, so I have to hunt more, if that makes sense. And I do that through a number of different ways. I mean, I set while I'm here in Canada, I'm a permanent resident of Canada, so thankfully I can hunt in British Columbia. And there's not a whole lot of stuff. You've got a pretty limited window on when you can hunt, and there are restrictions on what animals you can shoot. So I set my goalposts really, really high or far back, knowing that I'm going to get to do more hunting. And the result generally is I don't harvest an animal at the end of the season, but I still enjoy that process. I've picked up a bow in the last sort of 5 years. Have thoroughly enjoyed that challenge. Shooting a bow for me is my kind of hunting / man version of meditation. It's very hard to have anything else in your brain going on when you're trying to shoot a bow. If you do, you're going to stuff it up. So you become quite good at clearing your mind, and that sort of very pure motor process is, I find, very beneficial. So, and everybody's different, right? You see progressions of people that have gone through that hunting thing, and it was all about, just getting an animal, and then it becomes about getting a bigger animal, and then becomes less about getting an animal and more about getting photos, or, in my case, guiding and other people's experiences. So it's, everybody goes through that progression. So I think that one of the things that that comes out of all that big dose of verbal diarrhea is, I think I've become quite empathetic with every kind of hunter and everybody that you run into, particularly on social media, because you know that they're at a different stage in their journey right now. We deal with a huge number, or a decent number, of young Kiwi hunters who we bring into the Ultimate OE program. We spend 10 days with them training before they go to Canada, and they come into the program with a pretty strong hunting foundation, but they are all at slightly different stages of their hunting journey. And we know that once they've gone through our training, gone to Canada and had an experience in the mountains of Canada, hunting moose on horseback, or going to Scotland and working as a ghillie and as a deer culler, when they come back to New Zealand, they're going to be, they would have leveled up a number of times in terms of their hunting narrative. So having empathy for everybody who hunts and the reason they hunt, even if they haven't quite got down to that level of being able to articulate what makes them, what their why is and why they go out and hunt, that's fine. And everybody's different. So where you draw your line in the sand is different. So as hunters, I think we need to be empathetic with other hunters too, and just understand that everybody's at a different spot and everybody's got a different motivation, and everybody, I guess, justifies going out into the mountains looking for something to harvest for different reasons.
Absolutely. I think that level of where you're coming at to it is something that's really good. You know, I've been in Australia now for 9 months, and probably if I moved to the Hunter Valley, my outlook would have been different. But I'm in the Byron Bay area, which is, you know, there's Krishna and Seventh Day Adventist base there, and there's vegan everything. But on the flip side, there's the farm, and there's Brooklet Springs doing, you know, amazing permaculture chickens, and Nimba, you know, it gets a bad rap for being a wheat capital, but I've also got these amazing Wagyu beef that they push out on social media. So it's a real at odds part of Australia, where there's this massive agriculture base, and then on the flip side there's this, you know, vegan and spiritual base, but a real lack of hunting. But probably what I find really amazing about, you know, the likes of your podcast is that if somebody's sort of thinking about hunting or exploring that realm of, do I go left and you know, not eat any animals, or do I go right and source, you know, my animals from as close as I can be, they might stumble across your podcast and go, well, here's a level of ethics, here's some considerations, and you said about, you know, 10 days with you guys before somebody goes to Canada, that really level up. That's what really appealed to me about you guys, you know, setup, is that I knew that 10 days there and then a year just watching and observing and helping these people was going to really level up. Do you think that your podcast is going to bring somebody into a higher level of consideration when they go out on the hip, or is that the aim?
Well, it's certainly the aim. Whether it does that or not, I mean, from my perspective, if it does that for one person, then we've achieved something, and that makes me happy. Yeah, it's a funny thing, and you mentioned vegans, and you mentioned people who are, you know, ethically sourcing their meat and all that kind of stuff. And the funny thing is, everybody wants to be part of a tribe, right? Everybody wants to be part of something and have a belief system, and then have people around them that believe the same thing. Mm. What the irony about it, I find, is that if you were to sit down someone who ethically sources their meat from an organic, free-range farming situation, or even their vegetables or their eggs, whatever it might be, you sat down a pure vegan, you know, not an extremist vegan, not one that we shouldn't have pets and, you know, real scary vegan, but, you know, you're just your average vegan. And then you sat down a hunter, you know, particularly the guys that I associate with in the hunting industry and in the hunting world. If you sat them all down in the same place, I would say that 95% of their core values would be the same. Mm. That's the irony of it. And yet we're always pitted against each other. Like when I go to a dinner party, like they're like, this is Susan and she's a vegan. Like, and then just wait for the reaction, you know, Matt hunts, and then expect us to just get into a fist fight. Like, the reality is, I like sitting next to a vegan because they know their core values really well, and they know why they don't eat meat or animal products, and they are, you know, in touch with their own core values enough to say, and strong enough mentally to say, look, for this reason, I'm no longer going to eat meat. And a lot of the time when you sit down and talk to them, it's because they've got a massive issue with bulk farming, with big commercial farming operations, and how animals are treated on feedlots and in big battery hens. And I'm exactly the same. I've got, you know, issues with the way that animals are treated in a commercial battery farming type scenario. So once you get that out, they're like, oh, okay, so we're perfectly aligned there. So that's why I don't eat meat. And so, well, I wouldn't eat meat, but I can go out and harvest it in the wild, ethically, free range. And I've made peace with the fact that I can pull the trigger because I eat meat. Mm. Once you get to that point, you're so closely aligned that you probably got more in common than anyone else at the table, because you're sitting across from someone who's eaten a sirloin steak that would not doesn't want to know where it's come from, doesn't want to know how the animal met its end, doesn't want to have any kind of responsibility or blood on their hands, but they still want to eat their steak. So, funnily enough, vegans and hunters often have a shitload in common.
And the more irony to that is this sort of, I guess in New Zealand, this sort of green movement to get rid of our pests and have a vegetative and have birds and everything everywhere, is actually about, let's get rid of the pests and let's return to nature. And that's where I think a lot of hunters need to be careful on what they're saying around conservation. And you've had, Jordan from Trap and Trigger on, and he sits on the fence there. He's a recreational hunter, and that's where he got started. And he works for Doc. And not to bash the venison hunting guys, there's a bit of a hoo-ha about some culling done up in North Auckland, planned to be done. And again, it's like, well, what's the plan? Where are people starting from? And the ego comes in. Why do you feel so threatened?
Yeah, I mean it's a slippery slope, and unfortunately, the whole Doc and hunter relationship has got a shitload of history,
Yeah.
So a lot of the people who are hunters and are hardline anti-Doc have been burned some point in the past by Doc or something that Doc's done, either directly or through perception, right? So there's a lot of bad blood that's existed between Doc and hunters, basically since it changed from Doc, or from the Forest Service to Doc. So you're carrying, before a single thing is done, you're carrying a lot of baggage into that relationship, unfortunately. And that relationship goes both ways. Like the people who are lifetime forest and bird carry a lot of baggage or negative baggage against hunters, and vice versa. And I had a chat with Maya Rob the other day. Her podcast comes out this weekend. And she works for Doc. She does monitoring lines and bird counts for Doc. Really interesting job. You'll enjoy that podcast. But at the same time, she's an avid hunter, pig hunter, big game hunter, alpine, solo hunter. Like, she's the real deal. And her and I had a really good conversation about this. And it's, again, it comes down to, it's the whole hunter vegan thing. If you sit down a hunter and someone from forest and bird, if you ask them a question, do you want to see more native birds or less native birds in the bush? The answer to that question is going to be more native birds. It's like, okay, well, how do we achieve that? Well, how we achieve that is reducing predator numbers and managing game species, right? The unfortunate reality is our Minister of Conservation right now, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, and I don't know what everybody else thinks about this, but in my opinion, she sits more on the extremist side of things than the majority of the population. And the trouble is that the majority of the population in New Zealand a lot of the population in New Zealand don't really know what to believe, because Doc says one thing, and some, the hunters and the whatever say another thing, and then, everybody gets confused about what the reality is. The reality is that if everybody sat down and figured it out, the middle line is, reducing the numbers of introduced species like deer, goats, pigs, chamois, tahr, keeping them at a level where they are manageable and not impacting negatively against our flora and fauna. And by doing that, improving the environment, but also getting together as Kiwis and those who are recreational users of our public land together to manage things that we can all agree on that we don't want anymore. Rats, stoats, possums, wallabies, things like that. Again, it's all about compromise and having, finding an even ground. But the trouble is, like I say, right now we've got somebody in a position of power, being the Conservation Minister of New Zealand, the head of Doc, who is, in my opinion, an extremist, because if she could, and she said it publicly, you can look her up on YouTube saying this exact same thing. If she could, she would completely eliminate introduced animals from New Zealand. I think that's an extremist view, because that's as far as you can go to one end. That's total elimination from everywhere, period. Okay. The other side of that is, say, like a hardcore anti-Doc hunter saying we shouldn't do anything, there shouldn't be any poisoning, there shouldn't be any culling, there shouldn't be any management, we should just let everything run free and do their thing just so I don't have to walk very far to fill my freezer. That's the other end of the extremist level, right? And then there's all the rest of us that sit in the middle that don't really seem to have much of a voice or don't pipe up when we should.
On saying that, do you think that overall the hunting community did a good job of the tākau? I think it was really well facilitated by having that tā liaison group. Now, I don't know how much of a history that had, but it seemed to come out of nowhere. And NZDA sort of was quick to pump the brakes on a lot of people's outrage. And you know, I sit on Twitter and outrage is high there, and I somehow follow a few forest and bird people, and you know, there was a few of those sort of eliminate everything tweets coming about, and then there was, if you quickly point out to them that, hey, we need more information, they were, like you say, if you have a little bit of empathy from where they're coming from, and you know, don't attack someone, you can have a discussion and find middle ground pretty fast. Do you think the response to the TAR situation was well handled, or you know, in response, not necessarily in terms of the initial intent, but in terms of the response, it was done, you know, done properly? Do you think?
Well, it was encouragingly positive. It was great to see for the first time, at least in my living memory, hunters come together about something and put our collective efforts in the right direction. It was encouraging to, well, I think you mentioned NZDA. I don't think they get enough credit for what they did. They just basically wrote a blank check to the TAR Foundation and said, if you need to take them to court, take them to court, which was what put the brakes on initially. So I don't think the NZDA get enough credit for that, and nor do I don't think New Zealand hunters really understand that they are one of our only real political lobbying groups or voices that actually have a voice at the table that can make a difference. The TAR liaison group, you know, it existed, but there was some quick movement and getting the right people in place to get that up and running. And then whoever came up with the idea of a GoFundMe page, that was a stroke of genius. I don't know who that was. Kudos to whoever that was. And that generated, got up to 185 grand or something along those lines. That made quite a big difference. And in the background, there was a lot of work going on, talking to members of the tourism industry, or, you know, Ministry of Tourism, as well as a number of other channels that I won't mention here, because it's probably a little bit controversial, but a lot of things that were going on in the background, particularly in the professional realm, that were going to be working as fail-safes if it did. You know, we're not talking about anything illegal or illicit. We're just talking about getting cunning about things like ammunition supply, etc. So, yeah, I was really encouraged by the way that Kiwis responded to it, or Kiwi hunters and Australian hunters. Give credit when credit's due. A lot of those guys who come to New Zealand to hunt, you know, and they do it for free, essentially, were prepared to put their hand up and put some money where their mouth was to try and protect that resource. There's always going to be the misguided stuff that goes along with, you know, with Kiwi hunters throwing their 5 cents worth into a pot. And there was some, you know, pretty deeply concerning comments that I read on some of those pages, and there were some really encouraging comments that I read on there. But again, you've got to sort of have empathy for everybody and their hunting experience or their journey up to this point, and where and why they feel the way they do. And again, there's a lot of negative baggage getting carried around because of DOC for obvious reasons. So I can sort of understand why that was the case. But long term, I mean, hunting in New Zealand is an interesting thing. I think we have a great opportunity there to really, because our animals are introduced and they do need controlling, and hunters, recreational hunters in particular, could be, if well organised and put onto a proper management plan, could basically do the job. And I think that would be really positive. But to get to that point, to have some kind of management, we've got a lot of big hurdles to get over. And the biggest thing being, legally speaking, we need to change their status from pests to something else. You know, right now we're trying to push for, you know, species of special interest. Eugenie Sage has said that as long as she's in office, that'll never happen. All we can hope for is somewhere down the track we get someone who's got a little bit more logic and is a little bit more middle line rather than being that extreme, that they seriously look at that and the cost benefit of what that might look like. But in saying that, when you take away something that we've had forever, which is the ability to hunt as much as we want, when we want, for free. The trouble with management is that when we start managing our animals, we're going to have to give up some of that. And my fear is that a large portion of the hunting community are going to throw their toys right out of the cot as soon as somebody tells them they can't do what they've been able to do as a Kiwi for an extended period of time. It hasn't always been like that. You know, when they first introduced animals into New Zealand, you had to buy a license and a tag, and it was a pastime that was very much reserved for the wealthy. When they bred completely out of control, they obviously got rid of that system, and we've had it like that since probably the late 40s, early 50s, where they've been treated like a pest, and we've just had open slaughter get into them. When you take that away from your average Kiwi hunter, my fear is there's going to be an uproar of "you can't do that to me," entitlement reaction. And I feel like that's going to undo any potential work that we've done. So it's going to be really interesting, and it's part of the reason why we started the podcast, is to try and get as many people starting to think about bigger, wider management and what that would look like in practice. You know, it's part of the reason we run Ultimate OE. We send, 30 to 40 young Kiwis overseas to hunt, and be part of a different industry and a part of a different system to start to educate themselves on how it works around the world. So when they come home, they're better for it. Like we said, they've leveled up. They understand a little bit more about how it could work and what we have here as a resource, rather than just being solely invested in that Kiwi bubble. So, the likes of the Fjord and Wapiti Foundation, they've done a fantastic job over the last decade. They've proven that model does work. Hunters putting their hands up to maintain tracks, maintain huts. They are a big part of the Kia project down there. They do the leg work, put out traps. Like, huge amount of work goes into it, as well as taking out an agreed volume of deer out of that environment so that they are not having an overly detrimental effect on our native flora and fauna. So it's working down there. I'm sure it's this thorn in the side of Eugenie Sage in terms of, because it's a shining example that it could work. That kind of management could work. But I remember when Roy Sloan first started, when those boys, Roy Sloan and his mates, started the Fjord and Wapiti Foundation, when they came out and said, we're going to make it a ballot and you just can't go down there and hunt and shoot whatever you want. There were people throwing their toys out of the cot that lived in Tauranga that was never, ever going to get to go hunting down in Fiordland, and had no intention to go down there, but they'd had something taken away. So, now, what do you mean I just can't go down there whenever I want and shoot whatever I want? Oh, that's horrible, blah, blah, blah. And they stomped and kicked their feet for years until now. They just put their heads down, bums up, got on with the job, believed in what they were doing, and have done a fantastic job up to this point. Now people line up to shake his hand rather than, spit on his feet, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's a great bastion of hope, I think, for New Zealand hunting. If that were to fall apart, then I would be, devastated. And we have an opportunity with other species in New Zealand to do a similar thing. It won't be the same. One size doesn't fit all. But the idea of looking after a species, keeping their numbers down and managing them logically, I think it can be done and replicated all over the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Fjord and Wapiti Foundation. I've always said if they ever win Lotto, they'll get a bit of money because they do a fantastic job. And I love the story you told on the podcast about, I think it was 10 years difference between going to hunting expos, and the line for the Wapiti Foundation was a line of abuse to, like you said, a line to shake his hand and get after it. And you also brought up the herds of special interest. Just a bit more on the education front. What do you see now for the Game Animal Council? And I always, like I said, I pick up a New Zealand Hunter magazine, and the front pages were stories that didn't tell you much and just maybe got you excited that these things were out there. But the back pages, articles on, what's the age of this animal in the Field and Wapiti Foundation, and then what the Game Animal Council wants to do and wants to get underway. But as the sort of issues went on, it was sort of all, they're still saying the same thing. What's happening in Parliament? What do you see for them, or currently they don't have a shit show?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're up against it a little bit, particularly with the current government. There's no doubt about that. And in their defence, I think they've been up against it since they were formed. There was a lot of really talented people and good New Zealand hunters that had the right intentions when they were appointed to the Game Animal Council. But a lot of time and effort went into things that, the first thing on the agenda should have been figuring out how they were going to sustain themselves over a long period of time. Mm. So I've got a little bit of a conspiracy theory that they were sort of set up and doomed to fail right from the word go. If you look at other statutory bodies that have been set up around New Zealand, like the Land Access Commission, for example, when it was first formed, there were a lot of politicians put on that board whose job was to secure a revenue stream, some way to sustain that commission for the long period of time. When they set up the Game Animal Council, for whatever reason, that didn't happen. They just put a whole bunch of people on there that, on paper looked like they came from all different parts of hunting. They had the right intention and they all went in there with the best, as I said, intention, but there was none of them were focused on or specialised in getting that long-term foundation in place before they tried to do a whole bunch of stuff. So what we've seen is, and I mean, I say all this with a grain of salt. I mean, this is from me looking in from the outside. I might be totally wrong. I just want to make it very clear that I respect all the guys that have given up their time and put effort into the Game Animal Council. And I know there's been a shitload of work going on in the background, but, it's a hard thing. When it was formed, I remember thinking, yes, finally we've got this. This is what we need, perfect. I can't believe that happened. And then nothing happened. And just out of interest, every year, at this time, 25 guys, all passionate hunters from New Zealand, sitting down in front of us at the Ultimate OE training. They said, put your hand up if you've heard about the Game Animal Council. Out of 25, there's about 3 of them put their hands up. And I said, put your hand up if you know what the Game Animal Council does. And one guy sort of half kept his hand up, but sort of did the old, I don't know. Yeah. So everything aside, I think that's probably one of their biggest shortfall, is that they are designed to represent the hunting sector in New Zealand. And a big part of that hunting sector is recreational hunters. And I think that unless you read the back page of one specific hunting magazine with no pictures, it's just one page, unless you knew what the Game Animal Council was going into that and are, dedicated enough to buy that specific magazine and read that back page, that's about all of the communication they've had with recreational hunters since they were formed. Right? So the people who voted, and it came through Peter Dunn and the dissolving of his outdoor recreation party, and then he got into wherever it happened. I don't know. I'm not big on politics, but it was hunters jumping up and down and saying, we want some representation. That was the gift. That was the result of us doing all that campaigning and that hard work. And then since then, we haven't heard much about them. And there was a lot of people when that tar thing blew up, it was like, oh, okay, who's the Game Animal Council? They're going to come and fix it, right? And that was the first bit of publicity that had to the general hunting public since they were formed, which to me, again, you look at who's on that board, and those guys are all really good at what they do individually, but none of them, were experts in communicating with the 160,000 hunters that we have in New Zealand.
Yeah. Mate, something I've noticed, being away from New Zealand and coming back, I've watched 2 hunting shows this week, and we're based in Pukekohe and I've been downtown and there's 3 hunting shops. What do you think is, extra special about New Zealand, that even a semi-rural part of New Zealand still has that connection to hunting? Now, sure enough, here there's probably a bigger connection with duck shooting, and you go to the likes of the Coromandel and even into Auckland and it's into fishing, but you get to the likes of Waikato or Kaikoura and Dunedin and Southland, and it's in the blood. One of the challenges, I'm an optometrist, and one of the challenges we have is urbanisation of the population, and we're seeing the same thing when it comes to hunting and agriculture. How have you seen that? And so whereabouts are you from?
Well, I grew up in Palmerston North.
Yeah.
I was lucky. My old man owned and bought and sold a number of different big farms when I was growing up, so I got to sort of hunt. We had a big place up the end of the Waitotra Valley, and we've always had a decent size in the backing into the Tauruas. So my hunting was sort of always sort of focused around there. I mean, I guess a better example is the dichotomy between, I live in the centre of Vancouver. I live in a place called Kitsilano. It's where Lululemon was born. It is about as yoga-y as you can imagine. So I am living in a place where most of the people here are 2-3 generations separated from anything rural, right? So we are further here where I am living now in the timeline than, say, New Zealand is right now. So in New Zealand, the reason why we still have a lot of hunters and a lot of people who at least know a hunter is because we are still, a big portion of our GDP comes from farming in some which way or form, which is the outdoors, and then naturally hunting. And in New Zealand, I guess pest control is always going to be a part of that. So we don't have that urbanized separation in terms of hunting as, say, other parts of the world do. So Vancouver, Seattle, name a big city in the US, LA, that, they're 2 or 3 generations now separated from hunting. So that's where you get this hipster hunter kind of phenomenon coming from, is because people have been separated for a number of generations. They've never been around, they've never known a hunter, never heard anything about hunting. All they get is the propaganda that's put on television. Hunters are always the bad guys in the movies. They're always shown as villains or as evil, or a redneck dumbass that just drinks cans and doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. That's, for most people in North America, probably most people around the world, that's the image of hunters that has been fed to them since they were first started watching TV. So that's their total exposure to it. So if somebody tells you that big bad trophy hunter went and did this, then they 100% believe it, and they've got zero reason to doubt it. Okay, so that hipster hunter thing has been fueled largely by this long form format of podcasting, where they can listen to a guy like Joe Rogan or Cameron Haynes or Steve Rinella talk articulately about hunting, why they hunt, and the benefits, both mentally, physically, and from a conservation point of view, that make total sense, that are 100% correct, where smart people who live in urban centres are suddenly going, whoa, that's not exactly what I thought it was going to be. That's different. Maybe I should be involved in it, or that sounds like something I want to at least know more about, or even try myself. So New Zealand, again, we're in a unique situation where the pendulum hasn't swung as far as it has in other parts of the world. Like, we still have a much more valid social license to be a hunter, and we should make the most of that, because that social license isn't a right. It's something that is that can be taken away from you if you let that separation between hunter and non-hunter get too wide. At some point, if that void gets too big and the majority of the population don't understand hunting, don't know anyone that hunts, don't agree with hunting, don't know anything about it, if that gets too wide, when it comes down to a vote, should there be hunting, yes or no? And that's probably a little bit of a hard line example, but something that relates to hunting, like, should we manage a task species for, hunting on a trophy population? If the general public vote on that and they don't understand what the hell they're talking about, their vote's going to be no, because of the connotations that go with trophy hunting, because of the connotations that go with being a hunter. So as hunters, we need to be very careful that when we promote hunting in a positive light and an accurate light, and don't let our egos get out of control. Don't, push non-hunters away and dismiss them. We need to better educate them. And help them understand why we do what we do and the benefits of what we can do and how we can benefit, in New Zealand's case, the environment, reducing numbers of pests and managing our game animals in a way that's good for everybody.
You spoke there about social license, and that's something that's come into the agriculture sector. While living in the Waikato, they were starting up their water plan change, and agriculture sector is quick to bounce on Auckland that, hey, those beaches don't look too nice after a few effluent leaks either. But social license, even for farming, is come into question. What do you have to do in terms of to manage a sector of land, and it comes, like you said, does social license for hunting mean that you have to win a contract to go and cull a certain amount of animals for the management of birds and forest, or does it mean that as hunters we buy a tag, we report on what we've done? Outfitters have to maintain a certain level of bush and bird, have a certain level of trap lines, which a lot of people don't realise that they do.
There's a number of ways to do it, I think. I mean, I don't think New Zealand should go into a full-on tag system. I think that's a little bit too extreme. I mean, the idea of paying an annual fee or a license fee to hunt in New Zealand might sound a bit scary to people, but at the end of the day, that could generate quite a good schwack of revenue to then put back into management and maintaining that system. The trouble with any kind of management is if you're going to put restrictions in place, then you actually have to pay for and maintain some kind of enforcement, which costs money, and that would scare the shit out of most Kiwi hunters to think that they could get, someone could write them a ticket for not doing it properly, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So another way that they do it really effectively here in North America is every part of every gun, ammunition, sporting good, outdoor sporting good sold in the United States, I think it's 1.5 or 2% of that goes directly back into conservation. So it was a tax that hunters voted for and said, look, we want that to be part of, our, what we do. So if you buy hunting equipment or outdoors equipment or fishing equipment in the States, 2% of that goes directly back into conservation. So that's another way that you can sort of passively help with that conservation effort. But in order to do that in New Zealand, we would have to have an agreed management plan on how that was then deployed. Because the first thing that most New Zealand hunters, and probably rightly so, they say, well, I'm not going to pay a tax that's going to go straight to dock, and then they're just going to pour that into 1080 and blow out the area that I want to go hunting in. That's going to be the knee-jerk reaction of 99% of hunters, and I can sort of see where they're coming from, because right now that they don't have any kind of access to, contribution to, or ability to affect that management plan in any way. And as long as DOC stay hardline on the fact that all introduced animals are pests and will be treated as such and eliminated if possible, then we're never going to get to a point of that. So how it works in New Zealand, I don't know. I think the first step is certainly education, and getting hunters a little bit more open to the fact that some form of management plan would benefit us greatly. B is maintaining a good relationship with and making sure we educate non-hunters about why we do what we do. And part of that is portraying a positive image of a hunter in the New Zealand media. So more stories about the local hunting club, going out and doing a trap line, or the local hunting club turning up and planting 500 native trees in an area, or that kind of positive community labour injection as a hunter, as a hunting group, I think can really help our image, and will start the average non-hunter in Auckland relating positive stories about hunters and how much we love the environment and love the animals that we hunt and want to maintain that and look after everything, love our native birds, all of that kind of stuff. The more stories that promote that kind of hunter will help us in the long run when there is ever a decision coming down to, politically speaking, should we stop this or should we make this decision, which will negatively affect hunters. So, the hardliners like to maintain the image that hunters are redneck, dumb, honky tonk, don't pay any attention, aren't that smart, just do it to kill things, blood sport, all that stuff that's maybe applies to 1 or 2% of the entire hunting population. They love to promote that image, and they'll continue to promote that image because it's an easy one to attack us from. And it makes perfect sense. And we don't do ourselves any favors, because the first thing we do is post a grip and gring on Facebook with blood coming out of an animal's nose, tongue hanging out. It doesn't look good. So it's easy for people to believe that.
Yeah, I loved last night on Hunters Club, Tim, who you could mistake him for a back blocks, honky tonk, but absolutely.
He's a wee bit honky tonk.
Chases pigs, losing it over some Kiwis, and it just shows that some of the places that us hunters love to explore. You spoke about Field and Wapiti Foundation in the Fio. You get out into those high country rivers and these things are squealing at you, and it's no good for trying to sneak up on animals, but it's an amazing sight to see that it's not just on a $50 note or something. It's a real thing, and it's out there, and in the case of Field and Wapiti, it's something that hunters are doing to bring something back and make it populous.
I mean, can you imagine a world or a situation where every time Doc or Forest and Bird or any community group had a working bee or a volunteer scenario where they were trying to, reduce predator numbers, trap rats, whatever it might be, if there was, every time they did that, 50 good-natured, hardworking hunters from New Zealand turned up and bolstered those ranks and just ripped into it. Yeah. If we did that everywhere, it would change our image very, very quickly. And most of us have good values. We're all good, hardworking Kiwis. And by nature, we don't like confrontation. So as long as a hunter, nobody's dicking with my patch and I can still out and do what I do on my own and not have to worry about anyone else, that's fine. But the reality is we need to maintain that social license. So we need to maintain our image. So if we started doing that, and that's, again, part of the reason why we started the Educated Hunter podcast, is we hope to build a community around us that we can say, okay, guys, there's we're going to put some stoke traps in Valley X in this area this weekend. If you've got a spare day or two, come down and give us a hand. If we could start rallying troops like that, it would be fantastic. And I think it would be a huge tick in the positive column for the image of hunters. And as a result, long-term, work in our favour.
Yeah, you see good nature there. I'll have a quick shout out to Alex McCall from Squawk Squad. That good nature trap is bloody awesome. If we could come up with a couple of hundred to install a few of those along the place, I think they only need.
Wouldn't that be great?
Only need checked every 6 months.
And it's a funny thing. Like, you look at that Give a Little page, 185 grand in less than a week, right? Imagine if we could generate that kind of money around a hunter-based conservation effort in New Zealand and then deploy it, smartly around the country. 185 grand buys a shitload of dead rats.
Yeah.
Particularly if we're donating our time for free, which is the most expensive thing.
So let's go into this, your business. How did it start? You said you were, hunting for survival, and were you in Christchurch?
I was in Dunedin. I don't know if it was for survival. It was more of a self-imposed. If we didn't catch it or shoot it, we didn't get to eat it. So it was more of a self-imposed budgeting measure to increase the volume of booze we could buy, to be fair. But yeah, it's what was your question?
How does the business come out of that?
Oh, right. It came a bit later, to be fair. So after that, I got into the guiding side of things. Was internationally based. I helped out on a hunt for a guy called Jim Shockey in New Zealand in my first year as a guide. So just carried a backpack, volunteered my time because my boss at the time told me it was a good opportunity. Became very good friends with his son, a guy called Brandon Shockey. Sort of progressed through the industry on my own accord for a couple of years, guiding in New Zealand, and then in my off season I was going to Canada. I did some time in northern Quebec guiding for caribou, and then my next season I went and wrangled in northern BC, and then eventually guided in northern BC as a result of that experience. And then I went on to actually run camera for a number of years. Initially, the cameraman stuff was partly a way to extend my visa in Canada, but also me and Bran had become quite good mates, and there was a new TV show starting. So the two of us sort of started at the same time working on that, which sort of saw me as Jim Shockey's sort of, well, there was two of us, it was me and another guy called Todd Bissenden, who were his full-time cameraman at the time. So I worked, I was sort of anywhere between 280 and 300 days a year as a cameraman on the road hunting all around the world. So I did that for, like I say, 4.5, 5 years, which was a huge amount of experience and opportunity in a very short period of time. I went all over the place, all over Africa, Asia, Europe, South Pacific, hunting. And it gave me the opportunity to be involved in different hunting outfits and be guided by a huge number of different guides around the world, which sort of cumulated into a whole bunch of experience that made me better as a hunting guide, but also gave me a more of a global perspective of what hunting was worldwide as an industry. So once I was essentially burnt out of that, it's not an easy pace to sustain. It was the difficult question of how you take that experience and turn that into something that, turn it into a business. And one thing that both me and my business partner, Curran Island, felt very strongly about was the idea of giving that opportunity to other young Kiwis, essentially. So how can we make this a more accessible option for young Kiwis in New Zealand? And the answer was, well, what came out of that was Ultimate OE, where we could, at scale, take young Kiwis, give them the tools they needed to hit the ground running when they arrived in Canada, and then give them the opportunity to, experience that part of the world, that kind of hunting, and give them the opportunity for that kind of personal growth and progression, which would inevitably lead to, a number of different doors being opened for them all over the world. And that's sort of what we threw our weight behind is trying to get guys, recruit guys, mentor guys into that program and give them that sort of push in the right direction. And the result of that is coming out the other end, we get a lot of gratification, enjoyment out of seeing those young men and women, like I said, level up in a number of different ways, not just in the hunting arena, but just in terms of who they are as a human being.
Nice. On the flip side, going back to Joe Rogan, you hear him talk about how, New Zealand's this hunting mecca, but a lot of it's behind a fence post. What can we as a country do better to get rid of that perception and also better portray the reality of how big that property is behind a fence post? And there's the Shot Expo on in Auckland this weekend that's gonna, highlight what's behind the New Zealand industry. But then you look at things like, the Western Conference over in the States, and the outfitters are over there, and that's all the states are seeing. What can we as hunters do better to get out the message that New Zealand is actually this free range, wild, uninhabited place? I saw a great map of New Zealand of it, where people don't live, and it's like the whole country's in green.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting can of worms, that one, to be honest with you. How to unpack it, I'm not quite sure. The New Zealand hunting industry, internationally speaking, you're right, 100%. Guys like Joe Rogan and the guys he hangs around with are of the perception that, hunting in New Zealand is largely high fence. And what's been marketed to them since the late 70s, early 80s, and what they've seen, and then what all of their peers and friends and acquaintances and other hunters have experienced in New Zealand right up to this date is estate hunting or high fence hunting. So that, wrongly or rightly, is the perception of New Zealand hunting internationally right now. Be careful what you wish for. because when people start to figure out that our hunting is free, when people start to figure out they don't need to pay that amount of money to hunt on public land in New Zealand, like we have no restrictions. So if they bring a bow and arrow, they can go and shoot as many animals on public land as they want for free. Okay, so you say, how do we increase the perception, or how do we increase the knowledge that New Zealand is a free-range hunting mecca? I think we have to be very careful of how we do that, to be honest with you. I think it's probably going to end up being the catalyst for change in New Zealand. When that floodgate opens, and it's already starting to happen, you got guys like Adam Greentree who innocently will post something like, you should come and hunt in New Zealand, it's totally free, you can do it for free, here's a good place to go hunt chamois with your bow.
Yeah, and I think Nick,
to his 300,000 Instagram followers.
Yeah. I think Nick might have taken his tail with him to the States.
Like, I tell you what, when that floodgate opens, Kiwi hunters are going to go to their little honey hole and they're going to turn up, and there's going to be 5, 6, 10 American hunters there. It's already starting to happen with Aussies. But when that floodgates opens, like, suddenly New Zealand's going to be like, hey, this is our stuff. You can't come over here and do it. And the only way to stop them is to put in some kind of regulation in terms of a license, or they have to have a guide. With regulation comes management. With management becomes a reduced amount of freedom. I think that potentially could be the catalyst that gets your average Kiwi hunter to stand up and go, hey, we need to do something here, because we've got all these people coming to New Zealand essentially hunting for free, and I'm missing out. And it's going to be using our own sense of entitlement as hunters in New Zealand to push that change when we get pissed off with people just turning up and shooting what they want for free. So how we change that perception, I think it's going to change by nature anyway. We live in a world where information is becoming more and more readily available. I think that the animals in New Zealand are hugely undervalued, like massively undervalued. And that even goes for the guys that are doing high fence stuff. Like the fact that you can buy a 5-day tar hunt, free range in New Zealand for $4.5, $5 US is a joke to me. I think that is so heavily undervalued. It makes me sick when you compare it to everything else in the world. But at the same time, I understand the function of why it is so cheap. An Australian guy is not going to pay any more than $4,500 for a guided hunt, knowing that he could come and actually hunt the same place for free if he wanted to. So because our government has no value for animals, and let's face it, as a result, as Kiwis, we don't put a lot of value on our animals either. It means that internationally, and what we can sell them for, there's not very much value on them either. So it's a catch-22. Like a tar hunt in Nepal will run you $35,000 US starting price. Okay, you can come and do it for free in New Zealand, or you can go with an outfitter who specialises in Australians or in free range stuff and pay $4,500, $5,000 US and get it done, and that's relatively cheap. So again, it's an interesting can of worms, and all of these threads will have to come together, and there's going to be a tipping point somewhere. But I think there's a genuine lack of understanding and knowledge when it comes to your average recreational Kiwi hunter and what the professional industry looks like in New Zealand and around the world. Like, there's a huge amount of disconnect between those two things. The old idea of, the Americans come to New Zealand and shoot these high fence stags and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars and blah, blah, blah. You couldn't get any easier way to make money, is not really correct, to be fair. I think, I might be wrong. The average recreational hunter in New Zealand may have a good understanding for the professional industry, but my limited experience in the field would suggest otherwise.
Yeah, and I know, back to my passion for the deer industry, the guys in Waikato just sold a pretty good genetic stag, but that was some of his comments, is that if you're wanting to sell to the game industry, you need to be bloody good, or else you're wasting your time, because like I say, in order to charge that, the standard's gone up and up and up and up and up and up. I helped him cut some antler one day, and he's just like, my span's not big enough. We don't have enough points. We don't have enough leads. that these are worthless. And I was looking at it, that's incredible. But,
Well, it's partly that, but it's also the fact that there is a lot of competition in that New Zealand estate hunting stuff. And I mean, some of my really good friends in the industry, run outfits in New Zealand, and they're primarily estate hunting stuff. And I've got nothing against it whatsoever, but it's the old New Zealand mentality, like the old idea that you can bang a fence up with some big deer in there and people will come and pay shitloads to hunt them. The New Zealand market, in my opinion, is pretty flooded right now with competition, and it's not hard. You go to any one of those hunting shows in the US and you walk around and there's 30, 35 different New Zealand outfitters, and people are not stupid. They just walk around and say, well, this guy's going to give me that for that much, and then the next guy will knock this amount off the price, this amount of price, and it just gets cheaper and cheaper. And people who are just starting in the industry, they really struggle to get clients. Like, most people who go to hunt in New Zealand, particularly the estate stuff, get referred to from a friend who've already hunted in New Zealand and have an established relationship with an outfitter in New Zealand who've been up and running for 20, 25 years. And that's where most of the business goes. So as a new outfitter in New Zealand trying to sell, estate or high fence hunts, it can be, I can see it being quite challenging. Again, I'm not in the industry. I don't know. When we go to those shows, we have the ability to walk around and chat to everybody because we're not trying to sell anything. We're just there to visit with our employers and, say good day to everybody. So for us, it's easy to sit on the fence and make these kind of statements. So I don't know. But it's hard to not think that it must be getting harder because, it's becoming more well known that all those high fence stags, where they come from, all that kind of stuff within the industry, and it's putting a lot of people off going to hunt in New Zealand because their perception is they have to do it high fence. And B, there's a lot more outfitters than there were 10 years ago.
And circling back to the guys that you've trained up that come back to New Zealand, and perhaps this, legislation that if you want to come here, you need a guide. Where do you think the wild idea is? And there's a couple of guys out on the market that have this sort of entry-level father-son hunting mode. Do you think that they might be in with an opportunity should that sort of stuff come up?
Yeah, there's the like of Ollie Walker Cudby is his name. He's one of our old boys, went through the program. He is now operating down there in off the coast in Wairarapa. He does, quite a bit of the meat hunting, father-son hunting stuff. He's off to the Shot Expo this weekend. If you're in Auckland and you want to go and have a chat to a good, honest bloke who'll take you hunting, Ollie's your man. There are more and more of them popping up around the country. I think there is a real opportunity in free-range-based private land hunting because you can, when I say private hunting, I mean on private land, because you can control, you can manage it, right? It comes back to management. You can, shoot the right animals at the right time. You can monitor population. You can monitor trophy quality, and you can maintain, a good level all around. I think there's a real future in that. And yeah, maybe some of those guys will, their businesses could potentially grow. But it's hard to market that to an international audience, particularly from the US, who are used to seeing 384-inch, 400-inch stags as a minimum. They're used to their buddies coming to New Zealand and shooting 5-6 animals in 5 days, all of a massive trophy quality. Trying to convince them that they have to slog it out on the side of a mountain for 7 days to shoot a 12-pointer red stag. It's a hard sell. And again, because there's no value, the guys that are doing that are having to sell those hunts for, I don't even know how they make money, to be honest with you. Like, it's once you've got your overheads and fuel and licenses and your dock concession and your time on the mountain, or your marketing, your insurance, your health and safety. Once you put all that into it, I don't know how those guys who are doing legitimate free range hunts, even on private land, at the price that they sell it for, can make money.
Yeah, I've been following Ollie and and the guys at Metanoa, and from a public land perspective, he's done a great job of shaping what he wants out of the animals. But at the same time, where do you cover things? And
yeah. I mean, Ollie's not hunting public land. That's why he's hunting private land.
Yeah.
So it means he can control what gets taken off there every day. And he can, he's close enough to Wellington that he can market those father-son meat hunts and make a living out of it. So for him, he's probably a lot more profitable than doing it on public land because he can turn over the animals. So there's a good population there. He controls that whole area. So, he can tick over those, he has his trophy hunts over the raw, then he'll tick into, cull hunts and then meat hunts and then in the spring. So he can fill in a good portion of his year doing hunts that last 1 or 2 days. But as soon as you take a 1 or 2 day hunt and have to turn it into a, 5, 6, 7, 8 day hunt to get one animal, then the economics of it change a lot. He owns the accommodation, he owns the vehicles, he, does most of the guiding himself. So I'm sure he's got he'll be ramping up a nice little business there. But, if I were going to say, right, I'm going to start a free range outfit and take guys hunting on the wilderness estate to, shoot tahr, I don't know, man. It could be a tough one.
Nice. Mate, you said you had a few questions for me. Well, what would you like to know?
There is. I mean, it's something that Kieran and I, my business partner, talk about a lot. We've certainly been looking at the state of New Zealand hunting, and from a professional point of view, and really trying to tease out, where the opportunities lie if they do exist in New Zealand. Because like I said, guiding to me and Kieran and a lot of the guys that we've sent to Canada who have come back, it becomes a bit of a drug. Like, we're addicted to it. We love doing it, but it's really hard to get back into the industry without investing a whole bunch of time away from home or sort of, living in poverty. So we've really spent some time and effort in the last sort of 6 months analysing that industry and trying to figure out where there are some opportunities. I can't talk too much about what we're looking at right now, but it's certainly a work in progress that one day, hopefully, we can use that to at least increase the perceived value of what we have in New Zealand in terms of the animals and the quality of the experiences we can offer.
Yeah, just on that, at the start of it, I was sort of thinking back to when my mate and I attacked the Blue River after for the Raw with one of the Wanaka blocks. And, unfortunately for us, there's a helicopter operator in the Makarora, which does a good job through February there. But having now watched a few of those hunting shows and seen the areas that they go to, we sort of attacked the valley floor and looked up at the hills and thought, that might not be for us. And we're in the same situation. We've been around hunting people, from Southland, done rabbit shooting around properties and things like that. But when it came to actually, how do you attack that cliffside? Having someone with that little bit of experience, a little bit of coaching, and a little bit of push to, like you say, realise a goal might have made all the difference. And I was watching NZ Hunter the other night, and they just came up across a little basin, and all of a sudden there's some animals. And I look back at that hunt and go, maybe that was all it took, is a little bit of balls, a little bit of somebody to say, this is how you do it.
Yeah, if there's one bit of advice I can give you, unless it's early spring, I'd probably get out of the river basin. A little bit of altitude never hurt anyone. I could probably count on one hand the number of times in my guiding career and professional career that I regret getting some altitude and some perspective on what you're looking at. You will invariably find animals where you can't see them from the easy spots. And New Zealand's no different. So, yeah, I mean, there are more deer in New Zealand now on public land than there have been for a very long time. I don't think anyone will contest that. They've been steadily growing, and it fluctuates depending on what the wild venison price is doing and how hard the Waro guys are working. And I know Waro is a big sort of topic amongst New Zealand hunters. It always has been since the boom days of the 60s. Or 50s and 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. I'll rephrase that. Helicopters really started towards the end of the 80s and 90s. So, and that sort of gave rise to the venison industry, as you probably know. So there's always been this sort of, at loggerheads with recreational hunters and helicopter pilots and helicopter hunting. And I think it's kind of like the doc scenario. Like there's a lot of baggage there, and I get why people are very much anti-Waro, and it breaks your heart. And I've been in this situation a couple of times, particularly as a young fellow when I was first sort of going out on some bigger wilderness hunts. Is nothing worse than sneaking up a spur up a river valley first thing in the morning, and 100 metres before you get to the clearing, a chopper comes over your head and, you know, smokes the 5 deer that were standing on the clearing, right? There's nothing quite like that. It breaks your heart, and I understand why there are a number of stories like that, you know, from the average recreational hunter. If you're not a recreational hunter in New Zealand unless you've had your heart broken by a Waro operator. That's just the fact of life, okay?
We'll
so I understand.
A chamois graveyard on a nice alpine.
Exactly. I mean, I've got an archive of footage that, you know, of filming Waro guys operating, you know, in places they shouldn't be and all that kind of stuff. Like it just, I can see why there's a bit of a rub, but at the same time, Waro, without it, we would be in a lot of trouble, because the reality is that recreational hunters can't keep the animal numbers down enough to, you know, stop Doc having to go in there and do just extermination missions. So yes, and the trouble is with Waro, there's no management, like no long-term management. The venison price is high, the boys are in the air and they're shooting a shitload of deer. The venison price comes down, they're not in the air, the deer population builds back up again. And that's, you know, our whole management plan using Waro and helicopters is based on the international wild venison price. So there's no, you know, there's no if, rhyme or reason to it, and you can't blame the guys for shooting big-bodied animals, i.e. stags, because that's their bread and butter. Like, they're doing it for a living, they're not doing it for fun. So it's an interesting sort of kettle of fish, really, because we love to hate, as hunters, love to hate Waro guys, but at the same time, most of us kind of know that especially those who do enough hunting, that we actually really need them. Otherwise, we'll be up shit creek.
Yeah, and back to the attitude.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And I mean, you know, there are, again, to reiterate, there's a shitload of deer on public land in New Zealand at the moment. So, I mean, there's no real excuse for not being able to go out and find one. But it's that whole giving up some of our, you know, everything's free, do it at any time liberties for hunting in New Zealand, and substituting that with a bit of management could work better for us long term.
Absolutely, mate. Now I know we're on a time frame and we've probably nearly hit it.
I'm supposed to be at a Canucks hockey game and now I've got to meet my girlfriend for dinner, so I better not be too late. I'll be in trouble.
Yeah. So where do people find you in the podcasting, Kieran? And of course,
okay, you can find the podcast. It's The Educated Hunter. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and the Google one, whatever that is.
Google Play. Yeah.
Google Play. So we're on those 3 platforms. You can also go to our website, which is theeducatedhunter.com, and you can download the episodes directly off there or listen to them on there. In terms of finding Curran and myself, where I'm at Matt Gibson NZ on Instagram, and Curran is just an outdoor guy on Instagram. So you can find us there. If you jump on to the Educated Hunter website, there's a lot of different links for connecting with us in different ways, emails and all that kind of stuff. And then in terms of Ultimate OE, it's ultimateoe.co.nz. You can find all the details there. And if you're interested in going to Canada or Scotland to work in the hunting industry, get paid to do it, give us a yell.
Lovely. And for you guys, I'm just at Stag Vision on Instagram, and the Stag Roars through Anchors on most platforms. But yeah, iTunes and Google Play and Spotify are often handy. And then
awesome.
If you want to read about a great walk with guns in the Blue River, stagryan.com is where I have a blog.
Nice. I didn't know you had a blog. I'll have a read.
Yeah, I shared that a few years ago on one of the online hunting forums. Which, yeah,
nice.
It was a beautiful trip, which, as I said, learned a lot about maybe we should climb those hills.
Yeah, sometimes, especially when we get to our age. I'm just back in the gym just recently. I've got a hunt with Curran in at the end of March, and I've been on a good paddock for a few months, so it's been a little bit of a baptism of fire. It sucks. Fitness used to be a byproduct of my job. Now it's an effort. I spend most of my time staring at one of these bloody things.
Nice. What would you like to leave the New Zealand hunter or public person with there, Matt?
Just have a bit of empathy for everybody, really. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's got a lot of different applications. You know, understand where different people are at with their hunting journey and where they've sort of grown up and get their information from. And then as a hunter, I think it's a responsibility of all of us to spread the good word, for lack of a better term, and talk to non-hunters and help them understand the motivation behind what we do and our love for the environment and the animals that we hunt, and putting good, clean protein on the table.
Absolutely, mate. Rightio, we'll let you go and go to the Canucks. And
yeah, mate. Cheers. They're playing like shit. It's like supporting the New Zealand Warriors, but the Canadian version.
Ooh-wee.
They'll get up and beat the best team in the competition one day, and the next day they'll lose to the bottom of the table. It's frustrating.
As a Southland Stags fan, I can relate.
Yeah, exactly. All right, mate. It was good talking to you, Ryan.